the sector at large, but that it might be a bit of a stretch day to day seeing one's own organization reflected in that. So from your experience, how would you see individual organizations actually being able to find that balance between getting involved in those things that are much more concrete to them on the ground versus those things that are sector-wide? They might not feel day to day, and people might wonder, why are you working on this?
I read this question and went, I'm not sure what I'm going to say. No, but it's a really good point, because it's one of the issues that we face regularly when we're trying to get government or any policymakers to implement change for sector organizations, nonprofits, or charities, because there is such diversity in the sector, and there's so many different organizations, and there's so many different umbrella groups that represent pieces of the organization. There's AFP, there's the gift planners, there's there's hospital organizations, universities organizations, and so it is a challenge, and I think it's a challenge that the sector needs to sort of stand back and ask itself. So, and how do you ask yourself, because you're so different? But really try to figure out how to come together around it, and for things that are more like the modernization of charity law or the infrastructure pieces, which are in there and which are really important, and most of which have been referenced to this advisory committee that Bill mentioned. In some ways, those are things we just want sector organizations to say, okay, we really want to get it done, and be happy that there's a committee looking at it that's going to sort of target working groups for people who really care. For example, the international development committee groups really care about direction and control and whether they can grant to non-qualified donees, as do community foundations, as do certain organizations. So let's have faith in some of these organizations, support them, but let them do the nitty-gritty work on it. I think what you're doing at Imagine Canada is a really big part of how we bring the balance between those that are mission-based around grants and contributions, around how we work with government, and those that are just sort of technical infrastructure, how you bring it all together, because you're actually, and it's really interesting to look at that, you're getting people to point to the things that are really important to them. And one of the observations I've made with respect to the advisory committee is that I expect that this map is going to show that a lot of people are thinking about things that aren't tax related, that aren't sort of the real nitty-gritty regulatory, because that's not the day-to-day. Unless you're running into it, most organizations are going to be worried more about the secretariat, about grants and contributions, and about data. And I think what having Imagine and having organizations that try to bring it together. The other thing we might have to do is prioritize and sort of target some at a time, but support. Don't think that if you're supporting one, like data, that you can't then support some of the changes to the Income Tax Act. I don't think we should look at this as a move forward. And we were talking earlier about what's it going to look like 10 years from now. Well, I'm hoping 10 years from now, most of what's in here will have been addressed in some way, and we'll be moving to the next stage. So I think that's how I would answer it. It's going to be hard, but I think people have to focus on this as a package, and then participate where it's really important to you, and understand that all of it is important. All of it's going to have, and I think what this it really is quite a remarkable report, because it did get a flavor of the whole sector, and we don't often see that. So I think that's how I would answer that.
Okay, well, thanks. Vinod, your current endeavor, your website is The Future of Good.
The future.
The future of good. So it's not a choose your own adventure. The future. Now we know that with 42 recommendations, 190 pages, that the committee report is by any reasonable definition comprehensive. But from where you sit and what your thought process about the future, the emerging world, whether it's tech, whether it's AI, whether it's climate change, and the challenges those are going to bring, not just as a society, but as a sector. When you look at the report, are there things that you think are gaps that we're also going to have to keep in mind going forward over the next few years and pay some attention to, and leave ourselves with a bandwidth to be thinking about and acting on?
All that.
Yes. Yeah, so I was sort of been asked to speak about some of the gaps and the blind spots, if you will. I mean, yeah, the report is, as Susan said, is incredibly rich and comprehensive. I think there's some extraordinary stuff in there. Yeah, from our vantage point, sort of look ahead to sort of the next 10 years and how the world of impact is changing and our society is changing and our makeup is changing. As a society, how can the sector be responsive to sort of what we're sort of looking at? And you know, Fateema mentioned climate before, and Susan Schaper here from PFC. We were just at the PFC symposium, you know, last month in Calgary, and it was an extraordinary conference and conversation. And but also kind of this sort of moment in time where it was also the day that Greta Thunberg was in Calgary. Yeah, you know, the global climate strike is the world's largest climate protest in history. And so when you think of sort of movements, it's really sort of the beginning. They call it sort of Fridays for Future, but you can, you know, today it's climate, tomorrow it could be, I don't know, mental health, I don't know, right? So, and there's a reason why they call it Fridays for Future. It's because, you know, we don't really pay attention to the future enough. And so this was a message for the next generation that, listen, here's what we're going to call it, you know, something to do with climate. We're going to call it Fridays for Future. And that way, you know, today it's going to be about climate. We're going to make our voice heard. And tomorrow it'll be about something else that we're not paying attention to. So, but when you look at the report, you know, 190 pages, whatever, and you do a search for, you know, movements are growing. This is going to be the next big thing. We're going to see a lot of this in the next decade. You do a search for the word movement in the report. Guess how many times you find the word movement? 0, right? So this is going to be a big part of how social change happens. How, as a sector, are we going to support that and empower that and champion that? It's a gap. I'll give you another example. You know, sort of mentioned, I think it was just the lightning round, sort of talk about the HR council. So, if you look at how the world of work is changing, right? Just look at one slice of how the world of work is changing. Freelance work and gig work is doubling year over year in Canada and the US and kind of most parts of the world. It's actually increasing at a more rapid pace in the global south. And this is going to be a big part of how we work in the future and how social change happens, how we generate impact. Again, if you look at sort of how many occurrences of the word gig or freelance are in the report, can you take a guess? 0 again. So when you kind of, yes, the HR Council reinstating it is important. The HR Council wrapped up some time ago, and when sort of, whenever it comes out of hibernation, it's not going to recognize the world of work that we're in. Right? This is before the gig work, this is before automation, this is before, you know, Bitcoin, this is before a lot of things. So when we sort of look at the recommendations over the next sort of decade and the changing nature of work, how is our sector going to respond to the changing nature of work and jobs, both from an automation perspective, but also from a gig and freelance worker perspective? So I think we have a lot of work to do, and sort of just really looking at sort of the lines and what's in between the lines. And we've come up with, there's 42 recommendations. There's all kinds of democracy voting sort of going on. But I really pay attention to the dots the recommendations that don't have dots. and try to sort of kind of unpack that further and dive into it, and give ourselves permission to do that. So pause there.
Well, before I go from sort of the macro that we've just heard a little bit of Vinod season to a bit more micro, just want to open it up. Are there any thoughts, comments, questions from what you've heard so far?
I'm going to guess that Deep didn't make it into the report because it would be tough to translate it in French. So we'll just call it human resources. Going to go out on the limb there.
Right.
I'm really interested in this HR piece and the HR council, and I wonder from your perspectives, what I guess what could the HR council accomplish that could potentially not be done through other means like general policy engagement and advocacy work? What is the role of the HR council, or the future role of the HR council as you guys may see it?
So giving that some thought, I think you bring a really great, important point. And so I was looking at the HR council recommendation, thinking, oh, that's a great idea. As a leader, having support around HR, it's expensive. There's like HR, not HR council, HR, what's it called? Anyways, there's a service you can pay for. It's expensive. Sometimes I need HR advice and I use them. So having somebody who knows our sector, who can coach, but I need more, I have people who are working on contracts, so drafting a contract with an autonomous worker, they're not staff, and so understanding that as well. So if the HR council is resuscitated, I need that. So I think I'm grateful for your comments. So from my perspective, I think it would be useful to have that, which could be affordable, accessible, people who really understand our sector well, and that's how it works.
Yeah, I think what it would be is a resource, and it would be a resource that was available to the sector. It's not about necessarily it making the policy change, but I think what it was and what it would be is a resource. And I think its comment is it's going to have to be different than it was 10 years ago, because the resource and what it would do. ONN and Ontario is pushing for a pension plan that will help for people working in the sector. The HR council could get on that and make it a national pension plan. The idea, I think, is that it becomes a place that's thinking about, and benefits and that sort of thing. Because yes, we have this new way of working and autonomous workers, but there's a whole bunch of rights and things that people got as workers that are gone as a result of that. And maybe it can, be part of that and at least have a place where we can think about those issues.
It's also a chance for the sector to show translatable leadership, because the pension's a portable pension for job to job, right? So that would other gig economy work in other sectors could model that, right, for some more stability and a bit of longer term views.
To echo that, we published a story on nonprofit retirement security, and I think there's some really interesting sort of solutions out there right now, and we don't know what's going to get traction, but I would, from my perspective, sort of look at the HR Council as I'm completely missing it, I don't know, but we don't have a really good sense of the labor market situation in this sector. What skills do we need to create the social change that we desire? Right? Like soft skills, hard skills. I don't know. I don't think we have a decent picture. And I would not look at sort of like today, but sort of 10 years from now. What is the sort of the mix of mindsets and soft skills and hard skills that we might need to really thrive in social impact? So that's a big one. And the other thing I was going to say is one of the reasons Future Good is on the journey we're on is because I believe that what folks have sort of said to us are, the world is changing so fast. We have to pick up our pace of learning. And so how do we learn as fast as the world is changing? it's a really important question. And so, and we're making a sort of small contribution through stories and insights and that sort of thing. But I think I would see the HR Council sort of reimagine professional development and growth and development for this sector.
One of the other gaps that I see in the report, also in the sector, is that there is academic research, focused research on charitable giving and nonprofits. It just seems